Today was the first official practice for Carson Beck as a Miami Hurricane. From the arm talent to the intensity to the leadership, he exceeded my expectations.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy first day of fall camp. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this loaded episode, Akeem Mesidor, one of Miami's top defensive players, has a new slogan, and he's had enough. We'll explain what that means. We'll talk day one standouts all over the field. The guys were out there sweating today. It's very hot in South Florida. A lot of their work was done outdoors. Thankfully for me, they started indoors for the media viewing. But let's talk about Carson Beck, because not only was this, the first day of training camp for Miami, as we're exactly a month away from the season opener against Notre Dame. This was the first full official practice for Miami's new quarterback one. Beck was around for spring football, coming off the elbow surgery, was not cleared to throw for those practices. He gained his full clearance after spring ball, so Beck has gone through the past few months of player run practices, which are the ones coaches are not allowed to attend. So, yeah, that session today was the first opportunity I had to watch Carson Beck in a Miami uniform and see his arm in person. So we'll start with the arm. It was very clear that Beck was and is back to throwing with zero restrictions, not wearing anything on the arm. Didn't seem to be on a pitch count or anything like that. He was a full participant, and you can see the NFL level arm talent. He was physically capable of making every throw. There was a lot of zip and velocity on his balls, and you can definitely see how, Beck is building chemistry and really trying to build even more chemistry with certain receivers. Jojo Trader is one that really stands out. He and Beck were doing a lot of work together today. With some of the videos and the photos that were coming out of Beck at practice this morning, I didn't look at him as closely when he was at UGA. Obviously, I watched him on TV like anyone else, but I actually got a text from Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson. Of course, Gators and Bulldogs are annual rivals. They were, watching Beck a lot more closely than we were down in Miami. And he was telling me, he's like, I think Beck's legs look a lot bigger than when he was at Georgia. And yeah, I got to look myself. And I don't think he has skipped too many leg days. Maybe when his arm was hurt, he was doing extra leg days when he first got down to Miami. So you could see Beck has apparently built up his body a little bit more as well. In terms of how the actual practice went for him today, he definitely grew into it, which you would kind of expect, right? He hasn't really been, throwing regularly for the past several months. I'll let Beck describe it in his own words because we talked to him after practice, but maybe there was a little too much zip on the fastball early, but man, did he settle in.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It's the first time I've played live football. Obviously we have spiders on, not full pads, but it's the first time I played live football helmets in 8 months, so it was really exciting to get back out on the field. My arm felt absolutely juiced, probably the first 20 throws. That thing was humming out, and then halfway through practice, I think I finally, settled in, and I thought the ending of the practice for the offense was really, really good once we started to get to the team periods and stuff and kind of start calling it and moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, you definitely saw, the arm obviously always looked very strong, but he was settling in as practice went on. Mario Cristobal said something similar. Here is Miami's head coach recapping Carson Beck's first full official practice.
Really productive first day. He himself will tell you maybe his first rep or two might have been off by a little bit, and then by the middle of practice, really, really impressive. And probably even more impressive than that is his desire to get upstairs after a shower and getting cleaned up, of course, but getting upstairs and getting on that film and getting those corrections done to advance quicker and quicker. He's played so much football, he's seen so much, and he really understands our concepts well, but he had a very productive first day, as did the rest of the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mentioned seeing Beck and Jojo Trader, who just my humble opinion, I think Trader is going to really be Miami's #1 receiver this year. I base that on the eye test. Of course, Trader didn't play a whole lot last year as a true freshman. Really played well in that bowl game, though. And I think he's going to carry something over into this season. So Beck was doing a lot of work with Trader. I also saw Beck making some good throws to C.J. Daniels, who's the elder statesman in Miami's receiver room. Of course, Elijah Lofton at tight end, who I think is going to be a major weapon for Miami as well. But here's like the other part of it with Carson Beck. I mean, again, like you can see the guy has the arm talent. He's capable, physically capable. We knew that when he was at Georgia, physically capable of being an elite college football quarterback. He's been that before. I see no reason why he cannot be that again. But the interesting thing, though, about watching quarterbacks practice, I've covered a lot of quarterbacks over the years. Some of them are, have more of like a bystander, not very good leadership. I've covered some really good ones like Cam Ward last year, covered some not so good and not successful ones over the years. But something that I really appreciate about Carson that does remind me a little bit of Cam Ward is he's constantly talking to his guys on the side about the reps that just happened. He's instructing, he's teaching, which really tells you that when he's going through his physical reps, he's making a note mentally of who's running where, whether they're making or missing their assignments, and whether or not, what his players are doing is what matches sort of his philosophy and where he's looking to throw the football. And you noticed a lot of that. Like there was one thing I pointed it out during practice to our Locked On Canes insiders chat after a 7-on-7 drill. He and Emory Williams were off to the side and really talking through some of what had taken place on the field. And then, Judd Anderson and Luke Nickel, the other quarterbacks, kind of joined Carson. So you can see him out there teaching and you can see him visualizing. And it's something, again, I haven't seen that sort of stuff from every quarterback that I've covered over the years. And it tells me a couple things. Like it tells me this guy seems to have a high football IQ, and he also seems to have, a willingness to collaborate with his guys and a willingness to lead. Here's Carson. He was asked about that because there was an instance where, after one of the reps that they took, I think it was in a 7-on-7, he pulled Mark Fletcher to the side and they were talking through some things. Here's what Carson had to say about that.
Yeah, I think that's like a point of emphasis for me this year as well, is just like being more vocal. I don't think I've ever not been a vocal guy, but like just having a like major emphasis on it. So honestly, after every single rack, I mean, there's always something that we can get better at, right? Like, and for that example, like I might have not thrown the ball to Mark. I don't even know exactly what play it was, but I might not throw him the ball in a play, but I saw what he did on the play and threw it elsewhere. And then I go up to him and I'm like, hey, like, try this way, or what did you see on that look? Or because I can learn from them as well. You know what I'm saying? I'm not in their shoes. They're the ones, actually running the routes, doing the things. So I don't see it from their viewpoint and they don't see it from mine. So it's good that we kind of communicate.
Just a really good first day overall for Beck. And, the defense won some battles early on. I think the offense were winning more of those battles late. We weren't able to watch the 11-on-11s at the end, but I was able to talk to some of the VIPs who were, and the offense definitely made some plays out there. And Beck wasn't the only quarterback that made some plays out there. People are always asking me about the exciting true freshman Luke Nickel. I thought Luke had he and one of Miami's receivers created one of the more exciting plays. I think it was in the 7-on-7 drill. So Nickel unleashed this deep bomb to Joshua Moore, true freshman receiver, 6'4", 215 pounds, big bodied guy. And, it was a great throw by Nickel, and it was one-on-one coverage. I can't remember who was trying to cover Moore, but the coverage was pretty tight, and Moore just made this really impressive contested catch. So it was a really good throw, probably an even better catch by Moore. So Luke Nickel made some plays. I know Emory Williams, who has a chip on his shoulder. The narratives on him have been, pretty negative coming out of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. He seems very motivated by that, and he's really trying to attack, the mistakes that he made in that game and some of the mistakes he made last season. So, all in all, and Cristobal said it, all the quarterbacks did pretty well today, but you can clearly see who QB1 is. And I thought he had a really, really good day. And when we come back, we'll talk about who else had good days today. And who else stood out? They were not, of course, not in full pads today. That never happens in the first day of camp. So you didn't have the full physicality, but these players are still going to find a way to be physical. You want to keep it locked right here. A lot more on Miami's first practice when we come back on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether it's workouts, long days on campus like the one I just had, or staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is a doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. Guys, I've been on Drip Drop for the past couple of months, and I needed it today because I'm out there in the South Florida heat, walking to and from my car to practice. It's like 150 degrees. That's my estimate, about 150 degrees outside. And Drip Drop helps me stay hydrated. My go-to flavor is cherry limeade. So delicious. It's a game changer after a workout or on those extra busy days like the one that I just had today. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I take you around the conference, all the big storylines, all the preseason material you crave. We had my conversation with Ruben Bain on yesterday's episode. Locked On ACC is available free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's available free on YouTube. All right, so let's talk about some of the receivers. I mentioned Jojo Trader had some connections from Carson Beck. C.J. Daniels, Elijah Lofton as well. I was definitely looking at some of the new guys. Transfer receiver Keelan Marion out of BYU. You could see his quickness. He looks good out there. Tony Johnson, transfer slot receiver. It was noticeable the way he was able to create some separation in drills. So I am anxious, and don't ask me today who the starting slot is going to be. Way too early to handicap that. But the competition we're going to have between Tony Johnson, Ray Joseph, and true freshman Malachi Toney, I think they're all going to get on the field. Technically, only one of them can start. I think it will be more of like a by committee compared to what we had last year, but that should be a good competition between those 3 guys. No question about that. Elijah Lofton looked good. He made plays as he always does, who I think is going to be Miami's star tight end this year. I also did notice some good stuff from Tulane transfer tight end Alex Bauman. He had a really good contested catch that he made in drills today. The tight ends, it was kind of like the same thing that Cristobal said about Carson Beck, that it was like, some of the throws were like a little off maybe early on in practice, but really settled down, sharpened up as practice went on. I thought it was the same thing for the tight ends. Like in the really early drills, I noticed some drops from a couple of them, but I thought by the time they got into the 7-on-7s and more of the organized team activities, I thought the tight ends started to really look good. They recovered and they finished the practice strong. Some of the notes from defensive guys, I'm going to be like, this is all kind of my train of thought. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit from offense to defense and back and forth, but a couple of guys in coverage that I thought practiced well. You would expect them to and hope that they would. OJ Frederick and Xavier Lucas both looked solid today in coverage. They were contesting every pass in drills. They play with that physicality. I was also impressed, someone who I think is going to be an up-and-comer on this Miami roster, true freshman Jabari Antoine, the true freshman corner. This was our first time watching him because he was recovering from an injury back in spring. So, now he's full go for fall camp. And Antoine is another one. Like, he's got the size and the physicality, and he had a couple of back-to-back really good reps today in 7-on-7. So I think Miami's got some dogs in the defensive backfield, including some young guys. I was watching the linebackers as much as I could. I was having a harder time just based on what else was happening, with some of the passing drills. I get very distracted by the shiny objects of the quarterbacks and the receivers. But when I was, watching the linebackers, it was hard not to notice Bobby Pruitt, because in drills, he was covering running backs. Cameron Bobby Pruitt had a couple of interceptions, so he looked really good in coverage. Mo Toure is definitely a guy who plays with that burst and that physicality. The Popo Aguirre looked good today. Wesley Basaint, always looks really good in practice. So, and I'll definitely be watching the linebackers a little bit more in upcoming sessions, especially since that's the position group that is specifically coached by Miami's defensive coordinator. So, watching Coach Heatherman work with them is going to be exciting. Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, they both spoke to us after practice, and I really enjoyed some of like the stories that they told about what transpired today. They both speak really highly of some of the young players who are competing to be the 4th and 5th defensive tackles, Artavius Jones and true freshman Dante Simpson. So according to Bain, and Mesidor talked about it as well, they both had good practices today, and they're coming along because, we need preferably both of those guys to emerge in order to provide depth at defensive tackle, because, we talked about the separation with guys like Justin Scott, Ahmad Moten, transfer David Blay. Like, they appear to be like clearly the top 3 defensive tackles, but if you want to have a championship caliber team, you're going to need to be at least 4-5 deep at that position group. Justin Scott continues to look really good in practice. He stood out to me back in the spring. He still stands out. And, Bain and Mesidor, they both described Scott as having more intensity and urgency now, because he's no longer, behind so many upperclassmen like he was last year as a true freshman. So I think Scott really sees he's got that opportunity right now to get on the field, and he has to seize it. And, overall, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, guys, no pads, not full hitting, not full on physicality. So, there's only so much to be said about the actual, destruction that was going out there on the field, because guys are not in full contact mode right now. But you see some of the good intensity between the offensive line and the defensive line. And, they were telling us afterwards, and again, we spoke with Bain, we spoke with Mesidor, we also spoke with Francis Maui-Noa, and they were telling us after practice that, there was some really good trash talk and good competitive reps. It seems to me like Ruben Bain is a bit of a trash talker, and I love that. Last year, Miami had a quarterback who was a trash talker in Cam Ward. I love trash being talked all over the field, but it sounds like Ruben talks a little junk. And Maui-Noa was saying that, Ruben kind of jaws at him, and CC claims he doesn't talk trash, but I don't know if I believe him or not. But they had some intense reps there. And something specific I'll give you guys, because I thought this was cool. Ruben Bain talked about the matchups that he has against Miami's offensive linemen, and he mentioned about, Markel Bell. I guess when Ruben is lined up on the right in practice, Markel plays at the left tackle spot, that he has a tough time getting around Bell because of how long his wingspan is. And I don't know exactly how long the wingspan is for Bell. I can't give you the inch total, but the dude is 6'9", and he's got some long arms. So Bain specifically mentioned, I'm still trying to figure out how to get around that dude. So I don't know if going up against CC on the other side is any easier, because Maui-Noa is just a man-child and a beast. But, going up against Bell, Bain specifically mentioned, is not, a picnic because of how long those arms are. All right, so again, kind of on an overall note, a couple of overall notes on practice. Here is Mario Cristobal, who we spoke to afterwards, on the intensity levels today.
Well, the intensity, I don't think it's ever going to dip, If anything, it always gets more and more intense. I was curious to see, where we've had some, I would say, massive changes on defense, right? Schematically, we've had some significant changes on special teams as well. And then offensively, we've evolved. We haven't been the same offensively the last 2 years, and we feel like we could take another step schematically, as well as from a production standpoint. So intensity high, you always have to, and not in a bad way. A lot of guys are trying to make plays, so they take it a bit too far. just got to teach, man. Guys want to be intense. You don't want to break off their sword and make them too docile, right? You want to make sure they're aggressive. You want to make sure they are intense. We just got to be smart and stay up off the ground. We were on the ground a couple times, but came out injury-free, and we want to stay that way throughout camp.
So that's an interesting point that, sometimes when the intensity is so high, maybe if you get, a sloppy rep, you have to coach through that. So that's, something Cristobal and his staff, but they will never complain about the intensity being high, but they have to work through some of that stuff this time of year. Yeah, I talked about a couple of the transfers that I was watching from, Torre. Oh, Kamal Bonner also, he looks good physically at linebacker. Couple of the receivers. Mario Cristobal talked about how the new guys are acclimating because, some of the transfers were here for spring football. A lot of them weren't. I think if you include transfers and, Bryce Fitzgerald, who's practicing for the first time, who couldn't enroll early. I heard the stat that there are like 9 players who are here now that weren't here for the spring. Here's Cristobal talking about how the new guys are fitting in.
They did well. Again, our summers are really rep intensive, and our player-led practice routine, those guys, they take so much pride in it. They're very organized and detailed, and they push themselves. So getting to practice, it's never quite the same when you do it on your own as a player, but there's a lot of carryover. And the way that they've installed, the way that they've studied and spent time together, they didn't look out of place. In fact, they looked pretty darn good, so we expect them to all play a factor in this upcoming season.
Thank you, Coach.
Okay, guys, thank you very much.
So a note, by the way, on the practice structure, what Miami does out there, it's like very regimented. Like they know exactly what drill is coming up next. They don't waste any time getting to the next drill. They've got, the clock scoreboard tells you exactly how much time is left in the current period that they're running. It's very organized, very regimented. Carson Beck said something about that was interesting. He mentioned that, Mario Cristobal and Kirby Smart, who he used to play for, they both come from the Nick Saban coaching tree. And Beck has noticed from his time at Georgia to now Miami, because he was going over the practice script last night, because the players have to be ready for that. They have to know when I'm done with this drill, what drill is coming up next, because you have to basically sprint to your next drill. And Beck mentioned, like, he was looking at it, he's like, this is pretty much exactly, the same sort of format and script that we had at Georgia. So, that helps his adaptation to a new program go a little bit smoother. But, he theorized that, hey, Cristobal and Kirby Smart, they both learned how to do that from Nick Saban. So that might be something that they carried in. All right, folks, Akeem Mesidor was wearing a noticeable T-shirt after practice today. It had one word on it, and that word was enough. What does that mean? You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. First fall camp practice in the books, 1 month away from Notre Dame. I am Alex Donno. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. All right, so you're going to see, for those who are watching the video version, you'll see it. For those who are listening to the audio version, let me describe it. So Akeem Mesidor, one of Miami's top defensive players, defensive end, he spoke to the media after practice, and he'd gotten his jersey off. He changed clothes, and he was wearing this black T-shirt that had one word on it in white print. Well, most of it in white print, just said the word enough. But instead of a regular U, the U in the word enough was orange and green, that U logo that we all know and love. So it's a slogan, apparently. He's wearing a T-shirt that says enough. So I was glad Gary Furman from Cane Sport asked him the question, what does that shirt mean? What do you mean by enough?
It's just from last year. Everybody, just the narrative on Miami, and just we want to put an end to it. Enough. Miami can't finish. Enough of that. Miami doesn't have discipline. Enough of that. Just all the bull. Enough of it. It's time to change everybody's narrative on us.
Yeah, I love that. And I know what some of you are going to say. Yeah. Anybody can talk about it. Anybody can talk about changing a narrative. Anybody can come up with a T-shirt and a slogan. In fact, I know people used to, make fun of Manny Diaz for that when he was in Miami. The guy always had a slogan and a hashtag, never actually did anything. I get it, but I mean, you heard the passionate words there from Mesidor. He's very aware of what people were saying about Miami. You had a 21-0 lead against Syracuse. All you had to do was make a couple of stops defense. All you had to do was hold on to a 3-touchdown lead, and you're in the ACC championship game, and you're probably in the college football playoff. People think about Miami 2 straight years, losing to Georgia Tech, losing to Syracuse, not finishing games, not finishing seasons. Akeem Mesidor's had enough of it, but he's not telling us or you guys to stop talking about it. What he's saying is, we're going to make you stop. That if we keep blowing leads and if we keep fading at the end of seasons, how could we tell you enough if we're not stopping that from happening? So he knows, he's internalized it. I spoke obviously with Mesidor today, spoken to Bain the last couple of days. I spoke to him at media yesterday, spoke to Ruben today. These guys take ownership, even though, these were, they have been two of the better defensive players for Miami for years. These guys take ownership and they take accountability for the defense failing in big spots last year. They have a chip on their shoulder. They want to change it. They're not telling us to change the narrative. They're telling us they are working to change it, that they've had enough. Enough Miami can't finish. Enough Miami can't win the big games. That's what happens when you have a mentally strong football team, that these guys understand the only way to get rid of that bull, as he said, is for these guys to become physically and mentally strong enough, to become professional enough that they can work through, that they can close out games, and that they're going to put themselves in situations where if they practice hard enough, because that's the way it used to be, that's the way it used to be on Green Tree. You practice so hard that the games are easy because there's nothing, no situation, no adversary, no enemy that you haven't experienced on that practice field, and you're going to be able to win on Saturdays. So that's exactly what they're trying to create right now. By the way, as I'm thinking about Akeem Mesidor, one of Miami's top edge rushers, I also can't help but think another player who got my attention today for his sheer size and physicality, true freshman edge rusher Hayden Lowe. He's big, 6'5", 255, incredibly physically mature. Mesidor mentioned about him that he obviously looks the part, and Akeem mentioned he appreciates Lowe's his willingness to learn and just how seriously he takes the game. And he said, yeah, if he keeps working diligently, he's going to be a special one on Saturdays really soon. So I appreciate everyone who made Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, wherever you get your pods. We're going to talk more about tomorrow, the first couple of days of practice. We also have to talk about Locked On has released our top 100 college football players list. All the college hosts got to vote on it. Several dozen of us, probably, somewhere between 70 to 100 of us voted on this. And there are a handful of Miami Hurricanes who get spots in that top 100. We'll talk about that soon on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.